come through. First off, thanks to Frank and the Center for bankrolling our trip. It was about as productive as we could have expected. The mood with the elections, presidential elections coming up, is very hopeful. The pace of terrorism, we hear a lot about the terrorism in Sinai, but terrorism actually in Cairo and elsewhere is accelerating as the elections come up. It's a very strange dynamic on the ground. So the point that I was looking at on our trip was, what exactly is the Brotherhood doing with all this terrorism going on? What's their connection to it? Several weeks ago at Foreign Policy, David Barnett from the Foundation of Defense Democracies had an article called "These Are Not the Terrorists You're Looking For," dismissing the Brotherhood's involvement in any of the current terrorism. So I've termed my presentation, "Yes, these are the terrorists we're looking for." And these are some of the reasons why. I'm going to kind of fly through this, and this is actually an abbreviated presentation from a longer of a summary of our findings. Now, we understand there's some legislation being dropped in the House calling for the Brotherhood's designation as a terrorist organization, and the findings of that bill note that there are, the United States government has designated branches of the Brotherhood as terrorist organizations, leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorists, and charities. And in fact, here inside the United States, the Justice Department prosecuted the largest Muslim Brotherhood charity, the Holy Land Foundation, the largest terrorism finance trial in American history, successfully convicting the defendants on all 108 counts. But here's what's going on more recently. Steve will kind of get to some of the questions we asked the people that we met with, and some very surprising meetings we ended up having, including one of the founders of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, who we ended up spending about 8 hours with, Sheikh Nabil Naim, who's a pretty lively character. The Brotherhood and terrorism, in my larger presentation, I kind of break down the involvement in Brotherhood activity during the Morsi regime, and pretty much since January 25th, 2011, the beginning of the day of rage that led to Mubarak's ouster. The Ibn Khaldun Center in Cairo has actually produced a report chronicling the Brotherhood's involvement in terrorism since the June 30th protests, which resulted in Morsi's ouster a couple days later on July 3rd. I would recommend it. Talking about the violence at the Rabaa demonstrations, people who've been killed by the pro-Morsi mobs, etc. One of my favorites is this picture here from the Rabaa protests, which are all, we all know were peaceful protesters, just you know, trying to defend their human rights. And the guy in the cab of the truck there, he's wearing a Muslim Brotherhood hat with the Muslim Brotherhood logo. And of course, right beside him there is the Remington 870 shotgun, for purely peaceful purposes, undoubtedly. But Patrick, what does that mean? A couple days later, this Reuters report noted that when some Morsi supporters holed themselves up in the Fatah Mosque in Cairo, the wife of one of the Brotherhood leaders ordered gunmen at in the minaret to fire on the police. And Reuters is not some, you know, it's not Front Page Mag or PJ Media reporting this. The attacks on churches, I actually got the opportunity to go into Upper Egypt. I was in Minya the day they released the mass death sentence, and that was quite a whole adventure, including an ambush that had been set up for our convoy, which shortened our trip. And I made it pretty much down to Azout. We were on our way to Sohag, and one of the things during that trip we discovered in interviewing some of the priests who were actually there when the mobs broke in is that the churches were attacked in 3 separate ways. In particular, I'll show you some pictures from Delga, which is still a very hotbed of Morsi support. And in fact, the Islamists controlled Delga for about 5-6 weeks, and until the army came in and moved in. And Father Ansarius there in Delga said, you know, it was very organized. The first wave came in and stripped anything not nailed down, computers, toys, anything of value. The second wave came in, destroyed all the marble, yes, things of that sort. And then the third wave came in and torched the whole facility. And so I asked Father Ansarius, I said, how do you know that it was the Brotherhood? And he said, it was our local Brotherhood leaders who were at the head of the mob when they came and ransacked the monastery, which ended up resulting in there were 3 churches burned, including a 4th century Coptic church. And we also know from the Rabba stage at the Rabba protest, which was run and organized by the Brotherhood, including 2 of my former neighbors from Ohio, is that there was direct incitement against the Copts at Rabba. And the attacks were publicly condoned by the Brotherhood. Now here, this is a picture I took in Delga of the bell tower. The church immediately to the right, the larger church, was entirely burned out. The lower 2 churches, which were the older churches, are kind of there to the left. This bell tower had an interesting calling card left on it. Here, the graffiti that the ransackers had left down here at the bottom right. It says Al-Ikhwan, the Brotherhood. They left their calling card literally on the church bell tower. It was Al-Ikhwan, Muslim Brotherhood, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. But Patrick, what does that mean? How do we know that was the Brotherhood? But you know, here in D.C., I mean, those are valid. You know, those are questions that the D.C. Smart Set would ask me. This is straight off the Freedom and Justice Party, the Muslim Brotherhood's political party webpage, on August 14th, the day that the protest was broken up, basically defending the burning of the churches. It says, burning of houses of worship is a crime, and for the church to declare war against Islam and Muslims is the worst offense. For every action, there is a reaction. But Patrick, what does that mean? The Molotov movement is... much of the leadership is currently in prison. The middle and lower cadres are still in operation. Again, the Muslim Brotherhood is a secretive organization that's been operating under persecution for 80 years. This is nothing new to them. Their organization is intentionally structured for events like this. So they say, well, the leadership's in prison, so, you know, the kids are radicalizing. You know, apart from that, no, the lower cadres are acting directly with how they've been taught and how they've been indoctrinated. This is the Molotov movement Facebook insignia. You know, this is an image. Oh, what might that mean? Again, the evidence is stunning. This is actually back in January, where police raided a Molotov factory inside the Muslim Brotherhood office in Alexandria. Here's a little bit better look. You can see the Morsi mask. You know, these are all bottles filled with flammable materials. You can see the guy who had burned his hand somehow in the process. Here's a little bit more. There have been a number of arrests of Muslim Brotherhood leaders for inciting attacks against the police and the military. Since August 14th, there have been more than 500 police and military officials killed in these terrorist attacks. Doesn't get reported a lot here. In fact, this is from the Molotov movement's webpage, where they're showing how to create handheld thrown bombs. Now, when Al-Qaeda does this in their Inspire magazine, what do we call that? When they publish an article, how to build a bomb in your mother's kitchen, what do we call that? Terrorism. Now, what do we call it when the Brotherhood does it?
Workplace bomb.
Exactly. Thank you, Ace. The very public event made the news here in the U.S. several weeks ago, right before our trip. A young Coptic woman was dragged out of her car because she had a cross hanging from her rearview mirror. She was dragged out and stabbed 30 times, killed. Her name was Mary Sameh, and in fact, her brother lives in Teaneck, New Jersey, and had been visited by the Coptic priest we were working with.
And I'm speaking at Teaneck, New Jersey on the 21st of May.
And we're trying to make contact with her family there to see if we can get them to speak. Well, that's, yeah. That's a long-time Brotherhood hotbed. In fact, the Blind Sheikh was there. And right before we left, 2 Brotherhood members were killed in a shootout with police when they tried to burn down a police post, and they got in a gunfight, you know, for purely peaceful purposes, I'm sure. And you know, they were killed in the gunfight here just while we were there, building Molotov cocktails, Brotherhood, etc. Now the big issue is Ansar Bat al-Maqdis, the group in Sinai, was designated a terrorist organization just a couple days before we left. And in fact, in David Barnett's foreign policy article, this was the crux of his argument, was there really is no relationship between ABM and the Brotherhood. Well, one of the guys we met with, Amir Amar, is considered basically the top national security consultant in Egypt. And we spent, boy, hours with him over 2 different meetings. I specifically asked him, and he basically laid out what is a circumstantial case, and as analysts, that's what we look at. He talked about ABM activity. Before Morsi came to power, ABM was bombing the natural gas line into Israel on a regular basis. When Morsi got into office, it stopped entirely, and it resumed again when Morsi was removed from office. July 19th, Morsi grants Jamaah Islamiyah and Islamic Jihad terrorists pardons. And 2 weeks later, some of those same terrorists were involved in the killing of Egyptian soldiers at the Rafah border crossing. And that was reported in the media, Mon news agency. And one of the tribal spokesmen told Al Arabiya that Qariyat al-Shatter, the Brotherhood number 2, had been organizing a militia to attack the Egyptian army. During Morsi, the Gaza tunnels operated with impunity. The 7 soldiers abducted in May, which was a big national event by Ansar Bat al-Maqdis. Morsi made a statement saying, we need to preserve the life of the kidnappers and the kidnapped, which set many Egyptians in an uproar that he would, you know, that he would call for the preservation of their life. And specifically, one of the Brotherhood's main clerics, Beltaji, gave a video statement, which we had the video of, where he said, look, at the Rafah protests, he said, these attacks in the Sinai will stop as soon as Morsi is reinstated. But Patrick, what does that mean? Yeah, here's a citation about the gas line being stopped. This is the Mon news agency about the attackers that Morsi pardoned, the ABM members being involved in the killing of the Egyptian soldiers. And this is Steve and I with Sheikh Nabil Naim, the founder of Islamic Jihad. He lived with bin Laden in Afghanistan for 3 years. He lived with Zawahiri in Egypt and Sudan. He's now renounced his former jihadist ways. And over 2 meetings, we met about 8 hours with him. And he's publicly said that the Brotherhood provided $25 million to ABM to get them going, to basically build a counter to the Egyptian army, which the Brotherhood perceived as a threat. One of the things Steve and I did is we did about 40 minutes of video interview, which is currently being translated with Sheikh Nabil, where he talks specifically about this, which we hope to have out next week. Mohammed Zawahiri, the brother of the current Al-Qaeda leader, in his confessions after he was captured, he admitted that he had been the broker between ABM and the Brotherhood in providing millions of dollars to ABM.
And so from this 1974 case moving forward, the paradigm has been that the Brotherhood gets to condemn acts that fail, and they get to take credit for acts that succeed. We actually raised the question about how does that apply to Al-Qaeda, because you can argue Al-Qaeda kind of was a parallel operation. And of course, they said it still applies with a couple adjustments, and that is this, that okay. What you have is a situation is at the end, let's just say the Islamist mission succeeds and everybody has succeeded. What you'll have is something called reconciliation. And in this reconciliation, what will happen is they'll all forgive each other. You already saw that in Egypt when Morsi took power, when he pardoned all these people, many of whom then spun off and engaged in other activities. So what do I want to say? What I find shocking, I was surprised, and I don't get surprised by this stuff, is how different what you see going on in Egypt is from what we see reported here. Okay? That it's hard to put in words whether it was the cops, whether it was the reformed jihadis, whether it was these government people, or whether it was the people on the street. The outrage at what passes for elite reporting on Egypt that is going on in this country when they report on stuff. They don't call it a difference of opinion. They call it flat-out disinformation. And although you wouldn't know it, they get directly confronted there, and that also doesn't make the news. So I walked away with the understanding that the future head of Egypt, Sisi, who will probably get the estimation we're hearing from people in a fair election, is that he will get about 90% of the vote. And the hallmark of his running for office is the fact that he is committed to the total destruction of the Muslim Brotherhood. And one of the concerns they have, and I don't make it like it's a big concern, is that they're going to leave the Arab world. Saudi Arabia has already declared them a terrorist organization. They're putting a huge push on Doha to shut them down. That's at the same time that an executive order in the United States was issued about a couple months ago, watering down the material support language so that people who would otherwise be terrorists could still come into this country. And it's pretty clear that Hamas survived for a couple years anyhow because they set up a base of operation in Northern Virginia. And it's also pretty clear that that's going to work a second time if things don't change. That the most radical, at the very time the Arab Muslim world is in the process of shutting down Sharia as the primary basis of governance, they're not going to say that, okay? But going and shutting down the Muslim Brotherhood and their understanding of Sharia is something they're committed to shut down. At a time when we're in the process of making that our understanding of what Islam is as we bring these people in to start a base of operation. So I would like to I'm just going to look down some of my notes because I really want to stay just top of the discussion, not go too deep because we don't have much time. But I think we came away with a very interesting understanding. I would like to say whether it was whether it was whether it was Abdul Rahim Ali, whether it was Amir, whether it was Samir Gaddis, or whether it was Sheikh Nabil Naim, founder of Islamic Jihad. We would go in, and it was really clear they were to give us the time that you give someone who's from the United States, about an hour, and kind of throw a couple pieces of easy to chew pieces. And about 20 minutes into each of these discussions, they realized that we were asking questions that our translators couldn't figure out that they knew. I'm thinking specifically of a situation with Nabil Naim on a question, and they realized that we knew what we were talking about. And 3 different times, we came back a second time for 4, 5, or 6 hour discussions. And like I said, we were allowed twice with 2 different people, one Naim, the other Samir, to record some of these questions and answers. And I think we're going to use this to try to make a counter argument that there's no such thing as moderate Muslim Brotherhood, so long as you think that you're wrong. And you're wrong. This is not a disagreement. You're wrong as a matter of fact. And when policy is based on things that are wrong, they will fail. And they will succeed for the people who created that disinformation campaign. So my book is really about the fact that we're fighting the war based on narratives, where we're promoting people to senior positions based on their willingness to enforce narratives over facts. And I think it's about time we start addressing the fact of the matter and doing factual analysis that will start showing that the stuff that we're watching on TV is heavily massaged. Thank you very much.
Steve, thank you. And Patrick? It occurred to me that I didn't really do justice to Steve Coughlin's introduction by just simply saying that he's a senior fellow with our center. I went short because I think all of you know him. Steve has been an incredible resource to me personally, and I think to many others in Washington, notably for a long time, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on matters involving this fundamental phenomenon of Sharia and the danger that it represents doctrinally and strategically. As he mentioned, he's the author of a book that we hope will be through the mill at DIA here sometime in our lifetime. Catastrophic Failure, which is much anticipated. There's also a shorter version of the key parts of it, which we're calling the Red Pill, in the hopes that it will be, like the Matrix, all revealing. I'm very anxious to hear, more of the kinds of exchanges that you've had with these guys. But let me just mention one other thing. Steve alluded at the end, towards the end of his remarks, about this problem of limited material support for terrorism no longer being an impediment to someone coming into this country as a refugee. That would seem to clear the way for folks who are now being persecuted or threatened with capital, punishment or what have you, to seek safe haven in this country. We don't have time to get into it, or probably the information to do justice to it, but I do want to just mention in passing, Connie Hare, a colleague and friend of many years to all of us, has called attention to something that Senator Chuck Grassley released earlier this week in terms of information about an investigation that is now underway in the Department of Homeland Security concerning steps that have been taken to try to further reduce our situational awareness about people coming into this country by having what has come to be called a hands-off list for people who are otherwise likely to be subject to a second-order round of investigations or scrutiny before being admitted and so on. And apparently this was prompted by one of these individuals, when held up at customs, calling the White House and demanding that they be processed quickly. So this is a very, very rich subject. I just want to say that what you guys are doing to help explain the nature of the Brotherhood is critical to our ability to understand what they're doing in this country and the extent to which they've successfully penetrated the government and shaped our situational awareness about them. So with that, let's open it up to questions or comments.
Thanks. One for each, if I might. For Pat, do you know, or did anyone talk to you about the source for Ansar Beit al-Maqdis weapons and basically the weapons that were coming into the Sinai for their use and that they were using in these attacks? And then for Steve, I would ask, do you know what is happening with the Brotherhood leadership? Where is it? Like, where is Padilla? Where have they gone? And also the base. What is the base doing to evade this crackdown, and how are they behaving in the face of the crackdown?
In answer to your first question, it seems that the preponderance of weapons going into Sinai came through the Gaza tunnels, through Rafah. Many of those weapons came from Libya, our successful venture, NATO venture there. And weapons came in from Libya through the tunnels into Sinai. the money provided by the Brotherhood. As Mohammed Zawahiri himself has confessed to the Egyptian authorities that that trial is ongoing. We understand that there's later some additional information from these trials that's coming on. In answer to your second question, much of the Brotherhood leadership is in Torah prison, which we happened to drive by while we were there. And the lower cadres, particularly the students, even today, they've been, they're called protests in the English media, but in fact, I mean, they're burning down university buildings, attacking university professors, things of that sort. Again, anything that would be considered terrorism here, and kind of the descriptor that Stephen Cook at Center for Foreign Relations called it low-grade terrorism. Well, again, in any other context, it'd be called terrorism. So that's basically
to get into the United States, presumably.
Right.
Patrick, would you mind just coming over here so we can get a better video? Steve, did you have any thoughts on that? You've got a mic in front of you.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the things I found surprising, because there were times where we were, with people who had the Salafi type beards and stuff like that, who were clearly with Zabiba, and expected them to have a certain view. What really surprised me is how universally loathed the Brotherhood is in Egypt, and that things change. But right now, I don't think there's any reason to think that Sisi doesn't have a huge majority behind them and getting rid of them. And it seems like it's not just Egypt, although they're leading the way. It looks like Saudi Arabia has come to that conclusion. The other thing that kind of surprised me in that aspect is how much the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood, especially Hamas, is really loathed by the local population. They blame them a lot for the terrorism, the pure terrorism in their country historically. They did destroy over 1,000 tunnels from Sinai into the Gaza territory, and that has caused a huge financial shortfall. There are a whole lot of people who made literally billions of dollars on those tunnels, and so.
Wonderful. Fred?
Steve, you said that Sisi knew you were in the country and you met with the Coptic Pope. Could you tell us more, especially your meeting with the Coptic Pope?
Our meeting was going to be a brief initial meeting to follow up later with a longer meeting. He ended up being out of town, and there were certain things that caused some complications, so we talked mainly with their staff. I think they have two answers. One answer is the answer that aligns them with the Sisi government, and I don't want to sound like I'm being cynical, but if you catch them alone, they will raise their personal concerns about what's going on, kidnapping of very prominent Christians and holding them for money and stuff like that. I do think that there's some skepticism about a lot of Christian relief groups coming to help them and not, and making a name for themselves doing that and actually not producing any goods. I'm going to stop right there. But that became clear, and it was something that caused some friction. But I would say they're very, very. We were at this the Holy Saturday Easter Vigil, and we were very close. And the Pope was there and doing the service, and when the leadership of the Egyptian government came in, it was really clear that they were on good terms. It was to me, anyhow.
And when I was in Upper Egypt, I met with Bishop Macarius, who was the subject of an assassination attempt back in October. He described what Steve mentioned. In fact, we had lunch with a young man, George, who had been kidnapped, comes from a prominent Coptic family. His family ended up having to pay $500,000 to get him freed. And right before they freed him, they put a gun to his head and ordered him to say the Shahada and convert to Islam, which he refused to do. And things like that are happening. Rightly so, the world is outraged about what's going on in Nigeria with these now 2 mass abductions of Christian girls. This has been going on in Egypt for decades. Where girls are abducted, forced to convert to Islam before a sheikh, and the families never hear from them again. And hopefully this instance and kind of the prominence will hopefully get some attention to some of these issues. But these are problems. Clerics being assassinated, killing of prominent cops. We met with a very prominent Coptic businessman whose businesses are constantly harassed, and kidnappings. But one of the things that we also kind of the general feeling of Egyptians is one of great regard for Pope Tadros. And one instance that practically everybody who talked about it cited was when they were burning down the churches, many Muslims were going to go out and defend the churches, and Pope Tadros made a public statement and say, no, do not go out and burn the church, defend the churches. We can rebuild the churches, we can't rebuild people. And so there's a lot of regard in the Muslim community for Pope Tadros. It's clear he has very close relations with the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, who we're going to meet next time we're there, and Sisi. So,
Anybody else? Admiral?
Well, it wasn't central to your
Mike?
effort there.
Mike?
While it wasn't central to the purpose of your trip, did you find any indication, or did anybody talk about Muslim Brotherhood involvement in Benghazi?
Yes, they did bring some stuff up, and actually there is somebody in Benghazi right now doing a little research run, and they actually did speak to the fact that they have some people trying to track down some citations on some facts that they'll bring forward if they materialize. I don't really want to go into them right now because we don't know if they're going to be substantiated. But I will say this, the Arab world is not living under any mystery about what happened in Benghazi. There are people who agree with what happened and know what happened. There are people who disagree with what happened, but they know what happened. And this goes to the issue of, you know, I don't want to sound like a paranoid delusion, but I'm going to say something that makes me sound like a paranoid delusional person. I don't think it's the Russians anymore who have a problem with a controlled media and a controlled narrative in the news anymore. There's something really seriously wrong about how news gets reported here. And I'll turn it over to Pat.
And one of those figures that Steve mentioned earlier, the U.S. media in Egypt is universally loathed, and chief among that is David Kirkpatrick for the New York Times, who just happened to be the author of the New York Times whitewash piece on Benghazi, which was discredited within a couple days, you know, who said, yeah, it really was about a video. Matt Bradley from the Wall Street Journal is another name that kept popping up, and of course everybody knew about, you know, basically that they were all operating out of the Marriott with the Brotherhood and had very close relations with them. So just following up on Steve's point about how the U.S. media in Egypt is universally loathed. Steve mentioned the CNN about the Badia being the alleged supreme guide of one of the other things. When the Minya verdict came out, CNN, if you watch CNN, you would think that Cairo was burning down. And we were sitting out by the pool, a block away from Tahrir Square, and life just went on. You know, there were no protests, you know, and typically it's a group of 20 kids somewhere blocking traffic, and in the U.S. media that's perceived as, you know, Egypt grinds to a halt.
Can I ask you guys one quick question, Jared? The point that you made about several times now that there's this seeming unanimity about the Brotherhood across the spectrum. What is al-Noor's role at the moment? This is one of the Islamist groups that apparently is still more or less in bed with the Sisi team. And also, if you would, comment on reports that Sisi himself, of course, was sufficiently sympathetic to the Islamists to have been made the chief of staff under Morsi. How do you square what you believe is his determination to eliminate the Brotherhood with his own personal proclivities on Islamism?
Well, in terms of al-Noor, They are doing a huge backstroke, trying to distance themselves from the Brotherhood as quickly as they can, even trying to publicly recast Sisi as, some frothing at the mouth Islamist, which I really don't think there's much evidence of. And it seems that as he's laid out his program, that he's really looking for a broad-based national consensus. We're going to move forward. We're not, this is not a Sharia state. They've already passed revisions overwhelmingly to the Constitution to roll back much of the Sharia provisions that Morsi had pushed through in December 2012. So far as I could see, there was really no indications that would cause concern for what Sisi intends if he is in fact, and he has made, as Steve mentioned, he has made absolutely clear and said explicitly so in his interview Sunday night, is that he intends to eradicate the Brotherhood. He said the Brotherhood will not exist in Egypt. And meanwhile, at the State Department, they still continue to openly associate with the Brotherhood and say that they are going to continue to do so. And it brings up a conundrum in foreign policy. We ask countries after 9/11 to basically turn against organizations, which many of these states had supported at one time, because we had designated them as terrorists. Now these countries are designating groups. We're actually on the opposite side of the Saudis on the Brotherhood now. Think about that. We are on the other side from the Saudis on the Brotherhood. Good. Oh, none of them help.
One of the things that was, a report came out where we're gone, talking about changing sides in the war on terror in 2011, and I say that in my book, and I was briefing it in 2011. We switched sides in the war on terror, and the thing about it is that nobody seems to know that we did. That's the shocking thing, because we live in narratives where facts are not important. But they know we switched sides in the war on terror. The Saudis know we switched sides in the war on terror. Everybody over there knows who these people are, who we work with, and they know that they're the bad guys, and they know that we are with them. And so I think it's really important to just reinforce that point. One of the things that really surprised me, it didn't really surprise me, but there's things that don't surprise you that do, is I was in Warsaw, Poland for an OSCE meeting in September, where I sat and watched the Russians give a series of speeches that I sent to some people at CSP, watch out, this is a pretext for war, and it ended up being exactly what they did. And I'm tying it into here right now because it turned out at this OSCE meetings, the two most dominant players at that OSCE meeting was the Soros people, directly or indirectly, and the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference. They dominated, so much so that what you hear Putin saying right now, I have materials from either a Soros group or the OIC group saying the same things. And I say this because when talking to people there about the OIC, it's really clear that very few people are aware of who these people are. Now, if you go up to 100 Americans, you could get 99.9 to say who is the OSCE and not know that the U.S. does a lot of diplomatic activity there. But one of the things that becomes very clear is we have a Secretary of State who has agreed to subordinate the First Amendment of the United States of America to Sharia law on free speech through her agreements with the head of the OIC in 2011, and it's an organization that may not even have the actual awareness of the average, politically minded person in the Arab world. I mean, at first, you think they're just putting you on, but at a certain point you realize they really don't know who these people are. And I was asking certain Islamic law questions, and it was clear that Naeem and the other former terrorists knew exactly what I was saying. But the people we were with, who were facilitating us, who would tell us that they're totally devout Muslims, and we had our talks about that. I won't go into that. But, did not know certain things. And so I just think that that's worth noting, that what happens when you follow narratives.
Last question.
Detect any change in the attitudes toward Israel and the official media, at least, or is it still anti-Israel, anti-Semitic?
I think every now and then you'll have some official make some statement to We didn't hear anything, well, except for the tour guide at the Egyptian Museum. That's a whole other story. Kind of got into some bizarre conspiracy theories. But no, I think it's clear that Egypt has absolutely no designs to pick a fight with Israel. And they are in active cooperation with Israel on the Sinai problem. You know, in this part of the world, it is what it is. And I think, you know, having spent a lot of time in Israel here at the end of last year, you know, the Israelis understand that it is what it is. But it doesn't seem that the Egyptians are spoiling for a fight to revoke Camp David or anything like that, from my perspective.
I think that, what, 85 to 90% of Egypt is Muslim, and there are certain things they cannot not say. So the question is, and that has to do with what they talk about Sharia law ethereally, and so you can't ask them not to say certain things. It's still in their constitution. I think with regard to Israel, I think you have to expect them to say certain things every couple of years, like, you know, you have to recognize the Palestinian state or something like that. I'm not trying to whitewash this. I mean, this is something that always has to be watched. But in terms of seeing what is, we both are suffering from Tutankhamun's revenge, I have to tell you, and it's really vicious. But
Thank you for sharing, Steve.
But when I say watch, too much information, right?
Way too much information.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. You watch what they do, not what they say on stuff like that.
And I would add, it is clear that they understand that the Hamas problem is directly related to the Brotherhood problem, and they've closed 1,200 of the 1,300 tunnels. They have put a deep stranglehold on Hamas's finances. From the Egyptian side, they're actively cooperating with the Israelis. Could that change at some point? Clearly it could. But there's no indications that they have any, again, as I said, no indications that they're spoiling for a fight for Israel or to try to revoke Camp David.
Gentlemen, there's much more to talk about.
Can I just make one point?
You're proving my point. Go ahead.
One of the things that became clear to us is people should listen to what reconciliation is and what it means in the Islamic world, because one of the things we're hearing is Sisi is going to probably let up on some of the sentences or allow certain things to happen once they have reconciliation with the Muslim Brotherhood. And what we were basically told and is that what they're going to do is force the Brotherhood to have to give up everything as the cost of reconciliation, so that in the course of doing that, they're going to have to destroy themselves. That the reconciliation is they have to discredit themselves, and it's clear that they're going to try to force Hamas to do the same thing. That's what we're hearing as the talking points.
Well, from your lips or theirs to God's ears, as they say. That sounds good to me. Gentlemen, thank you for, again, the trip and for this report, and I know for much mining of the materials and insights that is yet to come. I hope you'll come back to us, and thank you for putting up with the discomforts that are associated with having made this mission, but do keep up the great work.